we are in the window where news will begin to emerge, maybe as we're on the show, regarding whether or not there were additional positive test results for today's batch of off-site PCR tests for Ravens players. I don't know what additional positives would do. The NFL seems hell-bent on getting this game in tomorrow, 3:40 p.m. Eastern. The game was bumped another day because players did not want to play today with no ability to practice. They practiced today, walk through, and they get some guys back. They're going to head to Pittsburgh tomorrow. J.K. Dobbins and Mark Ingram will join them in Pittsburgh. They are back now. This game has been delayed so long that two of the guys who tested positive 9 days ago are going to be back tomorrow. So if you kick the can long enough, you get back the first two players that you presumed you were going to lose. I don't know how much that's going to help because they still don't have Lamar Jackson, but it's better to have those two guys and not just Gus Edwards and whoever else is hanging around to run the ball.
Yeah, absolutely, Mike. And you don't want to be in a situation like the Broncos were in without a quarterback. You don't want to be without one of your leading running backs or offensive linemen or whatever it is. And they're still going to be down. They're going to be down a bunch of players tomorrow night. And I don't give them much of a chance. And I know we're going to talk about that later in the show. But they do have some guys back, and they will put a legitimate NFL team on the field, so that's a good thing there. One thing, Mike, you pointed this out, that Mike Tomlin probably wasn't real happy last week when Steelers players went off about the game being postponed from Thanksgiving night and ruining their mini bye that they were going to have. I have seen nothing, and maybe I dismissed it, but I have seen nothing from Steelers players complaining about this in the past few days. Have you seen anything?
I haven't seen anything, and I think that for two reasons. First of all, Mike Tomlin, whether he deliberately allowed them to use social media to vent or it just was in a blind spot for him, they slammed the door on that after that initial wave of complaints we saw last Wednesday. And also, there was a period of time where the Steelers thought maybe they were going to be in a full-blown outbreak. There were a few days where it got dicey last week, and it could have gone either way. And it ended up resolving in favor of not having a situation. So I think the Steelers eventually came to understand this can happen to anyone. And, you know, to get back to where we were before the season began, everybody understands that there will be inequities this year. There will be things that we look at and say, that's not fair. Well, no, a lot of things aren't going to be fair, and some things will be less fair than others, like having to play on 24 hours notice with no quarterbacks, like the Broncos had to do. But the NFL decided in October that there are 256 boxes to check in the regular season, and they're going to put a check mark in as many of them as possible, and ideally in every single one. And that's the most amazing aspect of this. Look, I'm not going to proclaim success or failure by the NFL big picture, but I think the NFL has found a way to stay on the bicycle through some pretty rocky terrain.
And we have a full season, Mike. We don't have a complete season, but we do have a full season. They could stop right now and go to the playoffs, and we'd know who the playoff teams were, and we'd feel pretty comfortable with who those playoff teams are for the most part. I mean, it's not going to matter who wins the NFC East anyway, right? So, you know, we would have a full playoff field that we would feel good about, and I think we know who the best teams in the NFL are, and I think that it would end up that way if we started the playoffs next week or the week after and didn't play any more regular season. So they've been very successful up to this point in getting the games in, and yes, it hasn't always been competitively favorable to some teams. We knew that going into the season, that was probably going to happen. And it has, unfortunately, for the Broncos and some other teams that have had to go through this with limited personnel, short practices, no notice, whatever the case may be. Every team pretty much has gone through this season.
We've made the comparison to baseball several times this year. The bottom of the fifth scenario, the game becomes official. The season now, you could say, is official because everyone's played at least 11 games. And in 1982, everyone played exactly 9 games, and they crowned a champion with 16 playoff teams. The difference, though, is in 1982, they knew when the season was going to end. And there were fewer teams also. There were 4 fewer teams. Correct me if I'm wrong, but at least 4 fewer teams. There were 28 teams in 1982. 16 of the 28 teams made it to the playoffs. I have kicked around this idea, and I'm just going to spitball it. We got some time here, so I'm just going to throw it out there and see what you think of it, Shireen. If there would be some crazy development now where all of a sudden everything is haywire and the NFL says we just can't proceed, the game is over, the season is done, we're going to progress to a postseason at some point in early January, we're shutting it all down. I think what they should do, if they get to a point where these teams that are trying to make a late kick can't get that fair opportunity to make their late kick, whether it's the 49ers, whether it's the Vikings, whether it's any team out there that's in the hunt when you look at the playoff picture. How about 24 teams in the postseason, but it would start with the last 8. Would it be the last 8? Whittling it down. I had an idea, and I can't get my arms around it, but I want to get to 16 eventually. But the last, maybe it would be 20 teams that get in. The last 4 would play each other, and like 12 would get a bye, and 8 would whittle to 4. Maybe that's it. You put 20 teams in. There it is, not 24. 20 teams get in, and the last 8 become the last 4 seeds of 1 through 16. What do you think of that?
I actually like that, and I think everyone would like that. I think teams in the NFL would like that. I think fans would like that. They would eat that up because it'd be obviously single elimination, get more teams in the playoffs. You never know what can happen once you get there. You know, a team like the 49ers, say they get Jimmy Garoppolo back and some of the players they were talking about today that they may be getting back. Would you want to play them in the postseason? I certainly wouldn't, even if they're that last seed to get into the postseason. So you never know what would happen with some of those lower seeded teams. But I think it would be fantastic. And I think fans would love that too. And the teams at the bottom certainly would love that. Like you said, a team like the Vikings who's fighting to get in. Maybe they go get in the playoffs and get hot with Dalvin Cook.
And I misspoke earlier. The Ravens are heading to Pittsburgh tonight. Planes, I'm told, leave at 7 o'clock Eastern. And as of now, 5:09 p.m. Eastern, no news of any positive PCR results from the testing that was done earlier today. So good news for the Ravens.
Good news.
I would still be a little nervous about getting on the plane, but double mask it, eye goggles, keep your distance, and hold your breath as long as you can on the short trip from Baltimore to Pittsburgh by plane. And we're going to talk later about some of the X's and O's and how this game's actually going to go, but there will be a football game tomorrow. And you know, didn't the NFL learn earlier this year not to put a game on while we're on? What the hell is that? So
exactly.
we're going to be multitasking, maybe some unofficial supplementary play-by-play of the game itself while we are on the air tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.